Hello, and my name is Pete Rushmer, and I'm your host today of a Half Dozen Things podcast. A Half Dozen Things is a podcast for business owners just like you. Whether you're an underdog hungry for success, or you're already smashing it but want to continue to level up, we are here each week for you to get insight and learning from the very best in the business. No fluff, no BS, and no self-proclaimed gurus talking about how easy business or life is. I'm delighted to be joined today by Mark Spence. Mark Spence is the Dangerous Goods consultant, and during this podcast we do an introduction into ADR Awareness. We talk about some of the training opportunities that we've got coming up, but overall we give people a really great initial understanding of what Dangerous Goods is and what ADR Awareness is too. Please do enjoy and share with your friends. Welcome everyone to today's session. I'm joined by Mr. Mark Spence. It's been an absolute pleasure getting Mark to come onto the podcast today, and I'm really pleased to have him with us. He's an expert on dangerous goods, and I know some people feel a little bit queasy when you start talking about being an expert or something, but I know Mark absolutely is, and he knows his stuff. I've had the pleasure of coming across Mark through various networks. I think actually we've sort of crossed paths. One through BNI, we're both BNI members. You over in Northampton and me here in Peterborough. But then also I think you know Dawn Girardi as well, who we do a bit of work with at Pegasus. She's Northampton based, and we sort of do a bit of associate work with their forklift training and us doing their first aid and that kind of thing. So it's a pleasure to have you on, Mark. For the benefit of the listeners, are you able to just sort of give a bit of an overview of what you do and sort of your background and that kind of thing, please?
Yeah. Well, I've been in transport logistics 25 odd years, and done a wide variety of roles, worked for Pallet Networks. For the last 15 years, I've also been Dangerous Goods Safety Advisor, DGSA, normally referred to. So it's all working within transport and logistics, advising on the safe transport of dangerous goods. And there's a huge range of things that fall into dangerous goods, most of which people don't really realise. There's an awful lot of everyday items, and most of what I do, it's auditing reports, but it's just general advice.
Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, so this has come quite timely for me because I'm finishing my last assignment on my safety diploma, and I've got to do a load of COSH risk assessments for various substances that are used on a farm to be able to clean milk, milking equipment for cows and what have you. And literally, if I had hair, I'd be tearing it out because I find it quite painful. But there we go. This is what you're here to help solve. So, Mark, it's a pleasure sort of having you on, and obviously we've got a few areas that we want to talk about. So the first thing is that we're going to be talking about everyday items that are dangerous goods. We're also going to talk a bit about lithium batteries, class 2 gases, class 3 flammable liquids, class 8 corrosives, and common misperceptions in transporting dangerous goods. And then also we've got a few quick questions which I've not briefed Mark on already. He doesn't know what they're going to be, but I went to the Facebook transport community that in the community hub that I run, which is the Transport Consultants and Consultants Hub. If anyone wants to join that, please do join the conversation. But I asked them what sort of stuff would they be interested to hear from Mark on, and I've got a couple of questions for Mark there, so he'll wait with bated breath on that. But first up, let's talk about everyday items that are dangerous goods, Mark.
One quick one, you're talking about your COSH and things like the REACH. That's very much on the sort of like in warehouses, in factories. My side of it is very much on the transportation of those substances. And while I know quite a bit about REACH, etc., it's very much how you transport them safely. Because I do get asked questions about that, and I can't advise on that particular aspect. So, I mean, with everyday items, I mean, it's like, the basic is your house is full of dangerous goods, but it's the transporting them commercially that's an issue. As a private individual, you can go to the shops, you can buy, not regulated at all. But I mean, it's common things like aerosols, perfumes, obviously very topical at this time of year. Very difficult. The post office won't take it. It's a flammable liquid, but other things, an awful lot of cleaning products. can be corrosives, some paints, hand sanitizer. I mean, there's a lot of issues, certainly last year, with transporting hand sanitizer when it's to be effective against COVID. It's got to be at least 70% alcohol, flammable liquid. And then the big one is we're going to talk about in a moment, lithium batteries. Lithium batteries absolutely everywhere, in your phone, your laptop, iPads, tablets, and a growing number of other items as well. And look after them properly, fine. But if you don't look after them, or you have a problem with them, it can get extremely nasty. And there's an awful lot of things on YouTube.
So I think it's a really interesting thing for me, because I'm a total novice, and I think listeners will probably be rolling their eyes at some of the questions I may ask, but hopefully it's useful because other people will be novices too. So let's sort of explore it a little bit. So I'm in my car and I go shopping at Tesco or other supermarkets are available, and I buy myself some aerosols and bits and pieces. Essentially, I'm transporting then dangerous goods. What really becomes the sort of catalyst or the turning point, I suppose, when it's been, or hand sanitizer or what have you, that it's then being transported for hire and reward, for example? When does that become a dangerous goods thing? Because I think a lot of people are transporting these items without even realizing that there's a need for them to have any help with from a dangerous goods point of view.
Yeah, there's a huge amount travels every day. The reality is there is, as soon as you get anything, you can, if you're transporting one aerosol commercially, it's classed as a dangerous good. There's exemptions for lots of things, like a fitter. If a fitter has got a little butane cylinder because he does a little bit of welding, there's an exemption because he's not transporting that commercially. He needs it for his job. Mm-hmm. But really, your couriers, your hauliers, anyone who's paid to move that product, mm-hmm. it comes under the dangerous goods regulations. And there's varying levels in that. The bulk of it is what I tend to call the retail. The things you buy in shops get transported in to the RDCs and then on to the supermarkets. There is a small element. It's limited quantities because you are limiting the risk. So it's your maximum for limited quantities is 5 litres, 5 kilos, depending on the product. So, and the idea being, I know you have a pallet of aerosols. If there's a problem with it, it's not going to go woof in one go because you've got each individual container that mitigates the risk. But really, anything, even a small pallet of paint or perfume, there is an element of the regulations that people need to be aware of. It's not like your petrol tanker driver who has an extremely well-built, highly regulated vehicle. He has to take an ADR license. He has to take an extra license for his tanks. Very well regulated, very well trained. That's your top end. It needs a bit of training and understanding of what they're carrying. And it's people knowing that they need to have that bit of training. Just be aware of what they're carrying and what to do if there's a problem.
Perfect. Okay. So one of the questions I did have just quickly before we go on to sort of the next area, but DGSA is quite clear. So Dangerous Goods Safety Advisor.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah. What does ADR then stand for?
ADR, it's actually derived from a French acronym, but in English, it is the Agreement for the Transportation of Dangerous Goods by Road.
Okay. Okay. So it doesn't necessarily directly translate into ADR.
I mean,
it should be ADGR.
Well, actually, because you take the D from dangerous and road, so the acronym is the same.
Okay. Okay. Fine. Okay. Cool. So let's go with then. Next up, we were going to talk a bit about, so obviously we talked about everyday items, and those essentially need to be transported in limited quantity, so sort of 5 kilos or what have you. So what happens then when you're moving more than that amount? What needs to happen if you're a standard transport manager and you don't really know anything about dangerous goods? If you know that you're being asked to move more than 5 kilos of one of these everyday goods, what process should you then follow?
Well, the critical thing is the size of the individual container. So if you've got a 5-litre tin of paint and it qualifies as limited quantities, then you aren't limited as to how much of that you can carry. You can have an Arctic full of it, and it's still classed as limited quantities. It's not the volume, it's the size of the container. There's a slight bit more. You've got, if you've got more than 8 ton, you've got to put a placard on the vehicle, and the driver needs to be trained. Then what catches an awful lot of people out is then if you start moving 10-litre tins of paint that are regulated, because you then have something called the small load exemption, where you can, what people may well have heard of is you can move up to 1,000 kilos before it becomes ADR, or certainly if it's coming in from the continent, they call it 1,000 points. And that's prorated. So it may be 333 kilos or litres. If you hit that threshold, that 1,000 kilo threshold, if you've got 1,001 kilos, it's full ADR. If you've got 1,000, plus the small load exemption, and the driver needs training, and all training needs to be recorded, so that if you get a visit by those lovely people from the HSE, the first thing I will want to look at is your training record. So you need to make sure it's logged and maintained. It needs to be redone every 2 years. And the driver needs to have a minimum 2 kilo dry powder fire extinguisher on the vehicle. And then he's covered. The vast majority of people, because it's the 1,000 kilos is per vehicle. So if you've got 2 pallets of paint that are 550 kilos each, it's 1,100 kilos, you're over the limit. A lot of people just treat it as full ADR because it can be quite challenging calculating it, because it gets quite technical. There's a few things you have to review of it.
Okay. One of the things I was going to ask you, and I suppose it's a bit of a name drop for our upcoming collaboration, where we're going to be offering ADR awareness training as part of the driver CPC. Yep. There's a 4-day ADR driver course, isn't there? And then there's an ADR awareness course. In that situation that you mentioned there, would a 1-day ADR awareness course be sufficient for that level of training if that's recorded and certificated?
Yes. Yeah. The 1-day course is training up to that threshold. Okay. So over that threshold, you need the full ADR license, which is where you do your 4-day course. Perfect. Really good. Okay, brilliant. So next up, one of the things that you mentioned was lithium batteries. So tell me a bit more about sort of what uses they are, and what sort of what we see them as from an ADR point of view. Yeah, lithium batteries can be very challenging. If you're allowed to fly at the moment, you go through your security. They want to see your laptop. They want to see anything that's containing your lithium battery. Several reasons, but obviously lithium batteries have brought down, or fires caused by lithium batteries have brought down several cargo planes. There's lots and lots of clips on YouTube of mobile phones exploding, scooters, electric bikes. You have this horrible thing called because you've got lots of individual cells in your lithium battery. If one of those gets corrupted and starts breaking down, it can give off toxic gases, flammable gases, quite easily catch fire, and you get a thing called thermal runaway. And once it happens, you can't stop it. Very recently, somewhere in India, a person got an electric bike and it was on charge. And you see a few pops, some smoke coming out, and then you got 6-foot flames coming out the battery at the back of the bike. So it can be very nasty. A few years ago, when hover scooters came in, there were something like 200 house fires caused up by these. The main thing you got to watch out with lithium batteries is the charging. Never use a cheap charge cable. If your cable gets broken, get a quality replacement, because a lot of these fires are driven by them being overcharged. And certainly with your phone or your laptop, if you see the back that it's getting bubbling or blistering, you need to get rid of it as quickly as possible, because the battery is starting to degrade. It's not salvageable. And yeah, need to get it replaced, save your data, get it replaced. Certainly in recycling centres, I heard a stat recently, they reckon there's about a fire every week in recycling centres around the country, and virtually all of them are being caused by lithium batteries just being put into the general recycling when they need to be treated as hazardous waste and need to be dealt with carefully.
Yeah, those people chucking those mobile phones just in the general waste, like, see you later. I got my new iPhone. It's interesting actually, because I've been going through the rigmarole. My young lad's getting his first phone, and we've inherited it from Nan and Pops, my parents, and it's come, and we've managed to misplace the charging lead for it. And whilst we use Android, I'm very aware there's some cheap Apple alternative chargers on the market, and I've seen the fires, the sockets that have been caused by these, and I'm seeking out it's going to cost me probably 10 times more than the cheap alternative for a genuine Apple charger, but I think it's probably not worth taking the risk.
It's not.
One of it's quite interesting actually, because I said to Mark before we started this podcast, I was like, my understanding of ADR is like 0, right? But you know what? I feel really happy with this lithium battery conversation, because just today I heard on the news that Transport for London have banned e-scooters across all of the public transport facilities. They're banned anyone carrying an e-scooter, and that's because there was a fire last month of them firing.
Last month there was a fire on the tube train.
Really?
Yeah.
And that's really dangerous, isn't it? Really, really, because people think that's militant. They're being really militant, but actually, when you think about it, that it's just pure safety and consequences and adding controls. And yeah, so anyone who's caught carrying an e-scooter onto any of the public transport or such like in London is going to be banned. They're going to be.
And I would expect that will be rolled out across the country as well, as other people think. I mean, you got a fire with one of those in an enclosed space, and particularly with the toxic gases it can give off, never mind the fire, quite easily have fatalities.
Yeah. So I didn't even realise the significance of that when I watched it this morning. And then obviously just speaking to you now, I've gone, I know something. Amazing. Okay, let's go on to... let's talk about lithium batteries. Talk to me about class 2 gases. So off the top of my head, I don't know what a class 2 gas is. So if you're able to just sort of take that to primary school level for me, Mark, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. I mean, there's an awful lot of fairly big oxygen. The thing about your gases, you've got 3 types. You've got your flammables, your non-toxic, non-flammable, and your toxic. So really anything that is compressed. Aerosols are a compressed gas. If you think oxygen, people have said when I've done training courses before, how can oxygen be a dangerous goods? It's a tad essential to life. The risk is the pressure, because they're all in pressurized cylinders. Even your aerosol, I mean, they say don't puncture it, don't throw it on a fire. And there's some lovely YouTube clips of factories in China going up in flames with aerosols, and you see it's almost like fireworks, these little bright arcs of little missiles coming flying out, and those are all aerosol cans where it's got punctured and then burn. They do, and aerosol cans can blow up with a massive bang. But there's a wide range of gases. Most of your aerosols you buy in your shops are flammable. For the older generation, they may remember James Bond in the 70s, where he's got an aerosol lighter and he kills a snake with it. I think there was a bit of poetic license involved, but you can do that. You can quite easily light them. Vast majority are flammable, but fire extinguishers, whether they're CO2 or some of the other gases, again, it's a compressed gas cylinder. I mean, as is the joy of dangerous goods, there's lots of exemptions. I don't know many drivers that would object to having a pallet of fire extinguishers on their vehicle. And actually, there's an exemption. They've got their own UN number. They are regulated, but there's a special provision that then takes them out of the regulations so you can transport them easily. You just got to be careful when they're used or been sent back for repair, then they then are treated quite often differently.
Okay, brilliant. And okay, so also you've put on the list here Class 3 flammable liquid. So what is a Class 3 flammable liquid?
Probably one of the biggest areas of dangerous goods. The big one already mentioned, paint, and there's an awful lot of things that get classed as paints. It goes far as creosote. And around it's any liquid that you can that will burn, as long as it's all driven by the flash point. I mean, if you put enough heat into anything, it'll burn. So these are things that will burn relatively easy. Again, we're looking forward to Christmas. Alcohol. Alcohol is a flammable liquid. That's when you warm your brandy up, you put it on your Christmas pudding, you can set fire to it. Yeah. And again, there's exemptions. Alcohol packed for retail, so in the bottle, and we're talking spirits, not beers and ciders. It's got to be really above 24% proof. So your spirits exempt. You only start coming into the regulations when you're moving it in bulk, like 1,000 litre IBC or something like that.
Right. Okay. I was going to ask you then, because I was going to say dray deliveries. I don't think they don't fall under ADR as far as I knew. So
no, certainly no beers. And actually, talking about dray deliveries and wooden casks, you can move up to 250 litres of spirits in a wooden cask. And again, there's a special provision that exempts that.
Oh, okay. So it sounds to me, the standard transport manager, it sounds a lot like the EU driver's hours legislation, where there's just so many exemptions. It's a bit like, well, you need to just make sure you know them all.
Yes,
and make sure you've got a good understanding of them.
Yes, dangerous goods. There's an awful lot of black and white, but then there's a huge bit of grey. And as with all these things, there are some things you can interpret two ways. But quite often it's right. Okay, well, you want to send it in that size. Okay, this is what you have to be aware of. You can reduce the size of the container and you can send it a different way.
Hi, it's Pete from Flagship Partners. We're really proud to sponsor a Half Dozen Things podcast. At Flagship Partners, we take road safety really seriously, and we're your road safety partnership. We help transport companies with compliance and training across their businesses, including first aid, driver CPC, and other transport management services. So if you're FORS accredited or you want to improve your operator compliance risk score, give Flagship Partners a call today.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, brilliant. Next area was Class 8 corrosives. So what's Class 8 corrosives, Mark?
Corrosives. Literally something that can damage your table, damage the environment by chemical action. So it eats away at it. You've got your acids and your alkalis. So there's an awful lot of cleaning products, drain cleaner, oven cleaner, bleach. There's an awful lot of these things that by chemical action will remove something. It's like bleach. You don't get bleach on your skin, you get chemical burns. And I mean, the reason I've chose those three classes out of the 9 is because those are the most common items that you will get. But you get a case of bleach that's been dropped, and all the ends have been broken and it starts to leak, then you got to be careful. You don't want corrosive material on you. So, as with a lot of things, but particularly corrosives, your drivers need to be checking the load. And if they see something leaking, then they need to deal with it before they move the vehicle. There was a case a few years ago down in Kent where a driver, I think it was carrying IBCs rather than stuff back for retail, but it was leaking. And he got out onto the main road, was contacted, pulled into the service station because he was on the motorway, and yeah, I'm leaking. Now, any volume of corrosives, particularly, but any dangerous goods is leaking, you stop as soon as it is safe, and you make sure your transport manager is aware or your boss, and contact emergency services because they've got the equipment for coming to deal with it. Your driver, your ADR driver, will have a kit, but he can only really deal with small spills. Anything big, you need to contact the emergency services. Unfortunately, in this case, the transport manager said to the driver, "Oh, you haven't got far. Come back." So he goes back onto the motorway, up to the next junction and back, all the time, spilling corrosives onto the public highway. Company was prosecuted.
Yeah.
The driver and the transport manager were both fired. They was both individually prosecuted.
Yeah.
And had quite hefty fines. And I think one of them may have even ended up in jail.
Really? Wow. That's a real reason to be listening to this podcast, isn't it? And then realizing if you need the training, you need to go and have the training. So that's frightening, really, isn't it? To think of the risk to the general public of those spillages happening on our roads, and people not being properly trained and making calls like that to not get it fixed is it needs to be sorted immediately. Tell me a bit more. So you've got 9 classes of dangerous goods then. So we've sort of picked 3 of them, 2, 3, and 8. With those different classes, are they in a scale or an order, that sort of 1 to 9, or is it just that that's how they've been managed? They've been allocated one of the classes.
Yeah. As I understand it, the basics for dangerous goods actually came out of what the French had at the end of the Second World War. And because their transport system was the most intact, it tended to take that, which is why it's a French acronym. But the different classes, there's no scale of danger. I mean, your class 1 is your explosives, but your class 7 is your radioactives. I mean, generally the 2 things you don't want to deal with. But again, you may well, everyday items that are explosives, especially in the current festive season, Christmas crackers, party poppers are explosives. They are regulated goods. Again, the amount of explosive in each is minute, but they're still regulated. There's still rules that have to be followed. They can be moved in, but it means things like Christmas crackers, you're not supposed to sell them to anyone who's under 12. So the supermarkets all need to be aware of some of these things as well, and as well as them being transported. I think the other big one that can get moved as limited quantities, rather than you needing a class 1 trained driver, is blanks and shotgun cartridges. Because the amount of explosives in each individual cartridge is so small, they're allowed to be moved as limited quantities.
Great. That makes sense. Just a question for you before we go on to the final one, which is common misconceptions. What got you into dangerous goods, Mark?
I mean, my first experience of dangerous goods was many years ago when I was working at Cadbury's, and there was a food flavouring that need to be moved from the warehouse down to the factory at Bourneville, and this was in the days before Google, and I'm trying to find information as to how I do the paperwork. Okay. And then many years later, I was a transport manager, And my boss at the time said, you like technical things, Mark. I think there's a niche in the market for moving dangerous goods. I'm sending you on this DGSA course. Went on the course and I suppose found my vocation. I love training people. I love explaining things and trying to make the road safer. Really, that's the whole basis. It's making everything safer for everybody. Moving things in properly, because there's a lot of the changes to the regulations have been driven by major accidents, disasters, and unfortunately, quite often fatalities.
Yeah, of course. I think it sounds a bit worrying though when you say about Cadbury's and Bourneville and moving stuff which is potentially dangerous goods that might be a food ingredient. It makes me wonder what might be in that purple packaging.
Oh no, there is. You've got food flavorings and food colorings, concentrated. They are flammable liquids. I mean, I've done training with people at who've previously worked at Cadbury's and at Nestle. You get tankers turning up fully plated, ADR, because they're taking in food flavorings. There's an awful lot of things that go into everyday food that we eat that in concentrated are regulated.
I'm not sure how I feel about this, Mark.
I quite often use chocolate as an example. Perfectly safe.
Yeah.
I mean, another one example being arsenic. Arsenic, everyone, poison, and quite a very effective poison. But you dilute it enough, you can use it as a fertilizer.
Right. Okay.
It's all down to the concentration.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, hopefully people are still concentrating on our podcast. Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Yeah.
So tell me.
and I don't want to scare anyone, really, because I mean, all these things, there's an awful lot of regulation to make sure, particularly for the private individual, it's safe.
Yeah. Okay. So the final one is common misconceptions in transporting dangerous goods.
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, we've covered it a little bit. I mean, I've spoken to, there's a lot of hauliers who say, and couriers, we don't do dangerous goods. No, we don't do ADR. But I mean, I mean, you've got lots of different acronyms, dangerous goods, HAZChem, HAZFreight, ADR, they all mean the same thing. And particularly this threshold that we've already talked about, this 1,000 kilo, there's an awful lot of people in logistics who think below that threshold, it's not ADR. To be blunt, they're wrong. It is still ADR. It is only a small part of the regulation that is applied. It's an important part because if you're carrying items that are regulated, whether the quantities or below threshold, and you get pulled by the DGSA or the police, then you can get prosecuted. And the driver can get prosecuted and your transport manager can get prosecuted if the driver's not correctly trained. The driver's responsible for what's on his vehicle, but the transport manager is responsible for ensuring the driver's correctly trained. So, and particularly with the massive boom in e-commerce and the fact that you can't get hold of a van for love and money these days because everyone's out delivering parcels. This time of year, there's an awful lot of things that's going through the parcel network, through the Royal Mail, that is dangerous goods because in a lot of cases, the consignor doesn't even think that they're dangerous goods. They just go through, all the companies put things in place as much as is reasonably possible to prevent it.
Yeah. So there we have it, right? So even if you're carrying and exempt under limited quantities, you still need to ensure that you've got the training to be able to understand ADR. Brilliant.
Yeah.
So all the more reason for people to come and speak to us about our ADR awareness, driver CPC.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
Because they'll get a CPC day as well and get to learn about it. So it's an absolute no-brainer. Okay, brilliant. So Are you okay if we move on to the questions that we've had from the other transport managers in the Transport Manager Hub? So the first one is it recommended to do the DGSA course? And from a TM perspective, Transport Manager perspective, what are the benefits?
You only need a DGSA if you are moving above that 1,000 litre threshold. If you're not sure, calculate it. It's worth doing. If you're moving small quantities, actually doing the course, I mean, it's a 4-day course. You've got 3 exams you have to pass. The pass rate for first timers is below 50%. And I think the pass rate for the individual exams is something like 65–70%. So it's quite high, and it's difficult getting information out of the SQA as to what you've got. You get a plain pass or fail. It's as simple as that. Not many people pass all 3 exams first time. It's a useful thing to have, but you need to balance having the qualification over what you're doing, how much you're moving. And a bit like getting a driving license, when you actually pass your test, that's when you really start learning. And it's the same with the DGSA. You've got the qualification, but there's still an awful lot more to learn. And you have to renew it every 5 years.
Yeah, I think like with any qualification, I think the challenge with being human is that we fill our brains with this knowledge and material to be able to pass an exam, and then if we don't use that knowledge, it goes. So you could have the qualification, and if you're not using it on a regular basis, there's no real point in having the qualification just for the sake of having the certificate. If you're not putting that into practice and you're not practicing that knowledge regularly, you're going to lose it over time, and you're going to get rusty, and in which case you're going to then need to speak to someone for advice anyway. So I'm a firm advocate, and people will listen and probably go, Pete, what are you talking about? Because in the sector, everyone's very knowledge driven, and I think it's great having knowledge, and I think it's great having good technical expertise. But I think if you don't practice regularly, it's a bit like a transport manager who's passed his qualification several years ago, and the traffic commissioner is expecting them to take a refresher, because if you're not using that knowledge on a regular basis, if you're only exposed to what you're exposed to, then you're not developing that understanding. You're not developing the practice that you need to be able to really hone those skills. I don't know what you think to that, but that's sort of my opinion.
No, totally agree. And I mean, we're certainly with the dangerous goods, the regulations are updated every 2 years by road, but also you've got regulations by sea. The regulations by air update every year, and you've also got regulations by rail, and though rarely used in this country, there's regulations by the waterway. Yeah. So you need to be aware of the changes. I mean, there's minimum half a dozen new UN numbers come in every 2 years. Yep. And things like engines. And about four years ago, combustion engines actually came into the regs and were given UN numbers. Hmm. So you now need to be aware, if you're moving an engine, you need to be aware of the regulations. This thing's quite often will take it out, but there's changes, there's constant changes, there's quarterly meetings that have been running since 1956 at the UN level, where they're discussing what changes are going to come in for the next set of regs.
Okay, so I've got a second question for you, which will hopefully need a little, well, I think we'll need a little bit of explaining. Exemption rules on consignors change next year. How is this likely to affect operators, both operationally and in terms of getting qualified and or getting an advisor?
Yeah. At the moment, you don't need a consignor. Sorry, you don't need a DGSA if you're a consignor. If you have your transport brought in, the carrier has to have a DGSA. If you're over that threshold, the consignor doesn't. The rule change is they will. So if you're consigning full ADR, and I mean that also includes if you're consigning, I know, small pallets of regulated paint, and even if you're giving carriers, small pallets every now and then, overall, you're consigning quite a lot. You need a change. You need a DGSA that's coming in from the 1st of January. There's, with all regulations, there's actually a transition period. So you will have to have your DGSA in place by the 30th of June, 2023. So actually, yes, the change that's coming in is January the 1st, 2023. And it's going to affect an awful lot of consignors, particularly those that contract out their transport. And there's actually a lot of hauliers who are thinking, well, actually, no, we need to be a lot more aware of what we're moving. So there's quite a lot of hauliers that are getting additional people put through the DGSA qualification to ensure that they are fully covered, because it's becoming much more on the radar, shall we say. And things like with the police, obviously the police have been somewhat distracted by COVID for the last couple of years. They're starting to do enforcement again. They were at Crawley on the M6 2 months ago, and 50% of the vehicles they pulled doing dangerous goods checks, there was an issue. From on-the-spot fines up to prohibitions.
So before I go on to the final question, I've actually just thought of a question. Who, in from a dangerous goods point of view, who is the regulator when it comes to dangerous goods? Is it HSE? And from a roadside stop point of view, you mentioned the police. Do the DVSA stop for dangerous goods, or is it just the police? What does that tend to look like?
Each nation under the ADR agreement, each nation has a competent authority. And in the UK, the competent authority is Department of Transport, and they have a dangerous goods division. And through BADGP, the Dangerous Goods Association, we talk to the FT every monthly. So they're the competent authority. So any queries come up to them. The police have a number of qualified DGSAs around the country, and they have, every force has at least one person who's the nominated person to go to. So they do enforcement. The DVSA will do the same. I don't know quite whether they have their own DGSAs or whether they bring the police in. And occasionally a local DGSA may get requested to come along just to give that additional information.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, fine. And you've just mentioned BADGP, which is the British Association of Dangerous Goods Professionals.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah. Okay, cool. So the last question is around this. So do you know anything about being a DGSA, or how BADGP, British Association of Dangerous Goods Professionals, organise themselves? In response to their call for member submissions to their newsletter, I've submitted a not overly positive review of my experience thus far as a BADGP member.
Yes, I must admit to some inside knowledge because I'm the chair of the organisation.
Okay.
And I have seen the review, and it will be being published. BADGP set up 11 years ago, mainly out of a concern, particularly talking with DFT, that the majority of DGSAs at the time were middle-aged, older gentlemen who were starting to look at retirement. And there was an awful lot of knowledge. I mean, these are people who practiced for many years. There's an awful lot of knowledge going out of the industry. So BADGP was set up to support DGSAs and anybody else in the dangerous goods industry. We put on seminars and webinars to provide information. We're also developing a new DGSA support program, particularly for people coming into the industry, that there is an awful lot to learn, and to give someone to as a contact as like a buddy to help them. And we're looking at CPD, whether we can bring that sort of thing with it as well. I'm very proud of what we do, but certainly we are open to constructive criticism. We're always looking to grow. Membership is increasing year on year. We're looking to do more. We have contacts into Europe. And we have specialists. I mean, I'm very much a specialist by road, and particularly with limited quantities, because that's the bulk of what I've done in my working life. But we have air specialists, we have sea specialists, we have specific class specialists as well. And there's a forum with probably about 2,500 people on LinkedIn, which is free to join, where people pose questions, and there's always someone give an answer. And sort of like growing our connections. We've got connections into the States, South Africa, and quite a lot of connections into Europe. So it's all about supporting people in the industry and trying to make it safer. Spread the knowledge, make people aware, particularly these changes that's coming through every November of the year before there's a change. So November next year, we get the DFT to do a webinar explaining what all the changes are. Just trying to get the information out. So,
Perfect. I would say if you're a DGSA and you're not part of the BADGP, you need to become part of the BADGP. And I think no doubt you'll be in touch with your disgruntled member and be able to realign his expectations if you need to. So yeah, fantastic. Mark, we've come to the end of the podcast. I can't believe how quickly the time has flown, but it's been an absolute genuine pleasure to learn from you today and understand more around ADR. So I really appreciate that. If people want to reach out and get in touch with you, or they're interested in getting you on board as a DGSA for them, what's the best way of getting in touch with you, Mark?
Probably the easiest way, quickest way is LinkedIn. I'm Mark Spence. My company is a Dangerous Goods Consultant. Recently got a website up and running. But yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best way.
Bro. Okay.
Or via yourself.
Yeah, of course. Or get in touch with me. I'm quite happy to put you in touch with Mark. I've certainly referred Mark into a couple of our customers, certainly some family known names that we deal with, and Mark's been in, and there's been absolutely fantastic feedback from them as to the quality of the training that Mark's delivered and the advice he's given as well. So I'm always happy to promote top professionals. And similarly, those that are listening, there is an opportunity for us here. We're going through the process of getting one of our courses approved. As those that will know, Flagship Partners are an independent driver CPC provider. We have applied to JALT for approval for an ADR Awareness course that Mark's going to be supporting us with. And, if people are interested, they can get driver CPC hours and they can get their ADR Awareness. And it's, great value for money, because they're going to be able to get both levels of certificate too. So please do get in touch if you're interested. Get in touch with either Mark or myself. But otherwise, thanks for listening. Please do share it and take care. Bye-bye.
I really hope you loved today's episode, and if you did, please make sure you subscribe and listen out for future episodes too. Please do share it across your social media channels. We hope to reach more and help more people. If you want to find out more about me, my name's Pete Rushmer. You'll find me across any social media channel, and my business, Flagship Partners, and we're your partners in success across your business. Thank you. See you again soon.